This week on LCARA Ham Radio, we're going to take a look at a power option for your radios. Does it introduce noise? Is it a good option to use out in the field? Or are you left with a pile of junk? That's what's coming up next this week on LCARA Ham Radio. Well, as you probably saw in the title, I'm going to be covering the Inergy line of products, or at least the Flex version of these products. This is KY4BDP Brian, and I've been using Inergy products now for about 6 years. I purchased one of their early products called the Kodiak. Some of you might remember that, some of you might even have it. And it's actually a pretty nice little lithium-based battery pack. Nice metal case and very durable. And I've used it for various things over the years. But about 2 years ago, right as we were heading into the pandemic, actually right before the pandemic, they came out with the Flex line of products. And we've got the Flex 1500 over here on the right. And the head unit there on the top is the Flex 1500. Now this has a DC to AC converter. And you can see the multiple plugs going across there, plus the 12-volt little caps right there. You can plug in 12-volt accessories. Plus, you can see the little round connectors there that I have one of the lights plugged into, USB-A and USB-C right next door to that. Plus, we have a decent display. It's not going to wow anybody, but there's enough information there that it's useful. And on the bottom, we have what's called a Flex battery. The Flex battery, we're going to go into some detail in just a moment, but if I turn on its power button, you can see its current capacity, charge level, and this. That's about it really on that one. Now on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, I have what's called the Flex DC. And the reason I got this one was it's completely DC. It's not meant to try to run AC-based products at all. You get 4 DC plugs, and those are labeled. Those are 13.8 volts regulated, 40 amps total. So you got 20 amps on each side, left and right. We have Anderson power poles right there in the center. That was another reason why I purchased this particular product. A lot of the lithium-based battery packs don't come with Andersons. Now you're starting to see some, but many of them do not have those. That's also 13.8 volts regulated, 60 amps total. That's 30 per Anderson. We've got our display there in the middle, if I can get the shadow off of it, and we can see it's pretty much also completely charged up. And then we have the round barrel connectors for 13.8 volts, 6 amps, and there's 4 of those. We have 18 volt, there's 4 of those, 18 watts, 4 of those for USB-A, and then we have 4 60-watt USB connectors. On the right-hand side, and another reason why I was really looking at the Flex DC, you have solar connectivity utilizing the 90-volt open circuit max input voltage. And that was another reason to look at this. It had a pretty high input voltage so that you could use some of the larger panels. They don't really restrict this on the wattage, but on the voltage, input voltage. We'll talk a little bit more of that, and you can see some of the reset buttons there if we have an issue with the solar or any of the other front panel-based devices. On the left-hand side, we have a fan output as well as some input slits there, and then you'll notice these orange sliders. The orange sliders allow you to connect the different modules together, locked and unlocked, and I'll show you the actual locking mechanism by taking 2 of these apart here in just a few minutes. The Flex 1500 that I showed you at the first also has the same sliders, the same, or relatively the same input and output airflow, and then we also have the connector on the right-hand side to allow solar or an AC wall adapter to plug in. It'll convert it from AC to DC. So that's kind of the 2 basic Inergy Flex kits. or bases, if you will, the head units. One's for DC and one's for AC. We're going to focus more on the DC because we'll use that with ham radio. In fact, in a couple of previous videos, you may have seen this being used to power my ICOM 7300. And let's go through the various components one at a time. What are some of their specs? And then we'll actually plug in a radio and use it and see if it generates any noise. So we'll be right back in the next segment. Alrighty, so let's go into the story about how I came about purchasing these units. 2+ years ago, back in 2019, I was intrigued by a new line that Inergy had introduced called the Flex. I had owned one of their original Kodiak-based lithium solutions, and it had worked really well. For its time frame, the metal case made it very rugged, and it had a pretty decent amount of capacity. Again, this is back in 2019, and there weren't that many competitors in this space. But disaster struck. I put in an order for both the Flex 1500 and the Flex DC in late 2019. And the pandemic kicked off in March of 2020, and it basically shut down China. A lot of these parts, especially the batteries, are sourced out of China. Many of the chips are sourced out of China. And so the wait began. I started getting emails from Inergy. They were relatively frequent, but there were sometimes long stretches when we just didn't know what was going on with our order. Inergy had asked us to put a deposit down. And so I had. So I didn't have a lot of money invested. And so I waited. And I waited. And I waited some more. Eventually, these started coming in this year. And that's nearly 2 years. I mean, it was a long wait. And in the meantime, there were other vendors coming out with batteries similar to this or, different in their own ways. Blue Eddy and the Echo Delta line of products, plus Jackery. There's a whole bunch of them out there, and they're all pretty much sourced out of China. But there were still some advantages to this solution. Not only is there an AC head unit, if that's what you're more focused with, but again, they had the DC unit, and that's all it did was DC. And for ham radio, that was what I was really looking for. I got the AC unit just so that I could use the same batteries and so forth if I needed AC. And these are great to take along for camping or for POTA activations. We've even used these batteries for field days and so forth. So it's a really nice solution, and it's very modular. You can add to it as your needs require or as you feel you need more. Now, let's go into some of the specifications. Some of these numbers changed during that 2-year period. In fact, some of these numbers were lower, and they increased them because they were able to re-engineer some things in that 2-year span. First off, the battery. The battery is about 1,000 watt-hours, and it's based on lithium nickel manganese cobalt, or NMC. You might wonder why it's not lithium iron phosphate. Well, one of the reasons is for density's sake. The nickel manganese cobalt gives you a really dense form factor in a slightly smaller space. And so that's what they were looking for, was the very a good capacity, but in a smaller package. And these are based on Samsung, LG, or possibly BAK-based batteries. Originally, when they introduced these, they were going to only be based on LG cells, but it was hard to source those because of the pandemic. So they eventually started bringing in some other vendors. The AC inverter on the Flex 1500 is a 1500 watt pure sine wave with the potential for 3000 watt surge. And I've actually tested that a little bit with plugging in the air fryer, for instance. Charging, we can combine multiple sources. One of the other nice things about this unit is that I can charge from solar and the AC wall outlet at the same time. And as we'll see with the supercharger, you can have 3 strings. You have the original input on the Flex 1500 head unit or the Flex DC head unit for solar. Plus, you can actually add additional connectivity with what is called the MPPT supercharger. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So you can actually power one of these up in about 1.5 hours if you had enough input. The lithium ion NMC batteries are expandable in the sense that you can add more modules. You get 1,000 watt hours per flex battery module. So if you wanted, you could add 2, 3, a dozen of these to the same head unit. In fact, One of the things that was interesting when they first introduced this was at least the theoretical expansion up to 96 of those battery modules. I have never seen that anywhere on the net. I have 3 of the batteries that I sometimes stack together, but 96 would be incredibly expensive given how a lot of this, the battery technology and so forth, has come down in price. The MPPT charge controller allows anywhere from 14 to 90 volts DC and a 30 amp maximum battery charge rate, 30 amps. So if you're stringing, for instance, in series, your solar panels per input, you can actually have a lot, up to 90 volts DC. And even if you do a little bit of series and parallel, you can go all the way up to 30 amp inputs for the charge. 13.8 volt regulated DC power for many of your 12 volt devices. And again, lots of solar array options. They actually provide Y adapters so that you can plug into the socket on the right hand side, and you can plug into the MC4 connectors that are used with most solar panels. So what's included if you buy a Flex 1500 kit? You get the Flex 1500 power console, or the head unit, and a flex battery. You can go to their website for current pricing. They were doing some interesting pricing during the rollout of these products, and I was able to take advantage of that. But right now, they've gone up a little bit in price because a lot of these materials have gone up in price due to inflation. It also includes a wall charger. So now we've talked a little bit about the 1500. Let's move on to the Flex DC and what it provides. Alrighty, so now I've got the Flex DC photo up here. You get a battery with the kit, so the Flex DC with one of the Flex batteries, the same 1000 watts, nickel, manganese, cobalt. But what's interesting about this particular unit is it's DC only. So you get 4 of those 5.5 by 2.5 millimeter DC outputs for Basecamp LEDs, and I'll put a photo of the LED, but I think I showed you one in one of the quick little video snippets. Plus the USB ports, 60 watts for PD and QC 3.0 charging, the LCD display, of course. But the Anderson power poles, you can see right there in the center, was a big draw for me. And each of those is capable of 30 amps. When they originally put out the Flex DC in the literature, when it was introduced, it was only 30 amps total for both of those connectors. And they've since gone up to 60 amps across those 2 connectors, so 30 amps each. In addition to that, you can add as many of those Flex batteries as you would like. And then it also has one of those connectors on the side for solar inputs. And I forgot the name of those until now. Those are called EC8 connectors. They're very robust and they're not going to deteriorate all that well or all that quickly. Plus, Inergy provides Y adapters again so that you can plug in MC4 connectors from your solar panels. So the Flex DC is nothing but DC, and it's really quiet. One of the selling points for that unit was that there was no AC converter. So there was nothing to generate noise. You're basically coming straight off the batteries. And in a previous video, I was showing you doing a site survey. If you haven't had a chance to look at that video, I'll put a card up in the top right, but no noise that I could discern. One of the things you can also do is just plug in a device, or in this case, one of your radios, and just see what the noise floor is plugged into the Flex DC itself. And what you'll see in that video is the noise floor was non-existent as far as like number of S units. It was as quiet as it could be. It was not adding anything to the noise floor, which I really appreciated. Now, the other device, now that we've covered the Flex 1500, the Flex DC, is the ability to charge your batteries even more quickly. Now, the way that Inergy decided to handle this was to come out with another module called the MPPT supercharger. This has 2 EC8 connectors on the side. So your head units, the Flex 1500 and the Flex DC, have an EC8 connector already on the side, and there's a built-in MPPT charge controller in the head units. But when you add the MPPT supercharger, you get 2 more of those EC8 connectors. So you can add 2 more strings of solar, 14 volts on the low end up to 90 volts. So you can literally have, if you have the base unit plus one of the MPPT superchargers, you could have 3 strings of solar charging 1 or more batteries that you have in the stack. that also kind of brought me to this particular product because of its expandability when it comes to charging. So not only do you have battery expandability, but you also have charging expandability, which you just don't see on just about any other product that's out there. There are some other battery solutions that allow you to charge by solar and by the AC wall outlet simultaneously. This does that. But by adding the MPPT supercharger, you get 3 strings of solar plus the AC charger, and you can actually add more than one MPPT supercharger if you want to, because you have a lot of batteries. And those superchargers can help supercharge the stack of batteries even faster. You can charge one of the flex batteries in about an hour by utilizing the EC8 connector and maximum voltage and or wattage going in. Adding the MPPT supercharger allows you to power up even quicker, depending on how many batteries you have in your stack. Alrighty, so we're back here with the ICOM 7300. Now, we are connected with Anderson power pole to one of the 30 amp outputs right there. So that's what we're connected to. You can see just sitting here, we're using about 24 watts, not much. And if I wanted to work 48 hours, that's about how much battery capacity I've got. Not that I'm going to, but kind of funny to think about. Now, right now I'm on 40 meters, and I'm just looking at the overall noise floor. And in fact, if we look up here in the top right corner, you can see that the noise floor is nearly non-existent. We're getting some crashes due to, I believe it's Hurricane Charlotte. Anyway, the hurricane going through Florida at the moment. So there's a little bit of thunderstorm activity south of where I am. So you're seeing a few crashes coming in there on the SSWR meter there in the top left corner. But on balance, you can see that there's hardly anything there. You'll see a little blip come in and then it goes away. So there's nothing really being added by the Flex DC. And if you look at the overall scope, it's very quiet. You've got that really dark blue, black background, and pretty much all you're seeing are some of the crashes and actual RF signals that are out there. Let's go see if we can find somebody on the band. Let's see how clear it'll come in. Look at that. Barely a signal, but we're able to bring them in pretty well. If your noise floor was higher, you'd have a hard time digging this one out of the noise sometimes. Not a very strong signal, about an S3, but very clear. Again, the noise floor helps. If you have headphones on, you're going to have an even easier time of it. Let's go to a really strong signal if we can find one.
NG0Z. Is this frequency in use, please?
So you can see this signal is quite a bit stronger. But look at that, nearly black on the noise floor. I don't have a preamp turned on. We're going to turn those on in a minute.
NG0Z. Is this frequency in use, please?
Really nice signal there. Again, a couple of weaker signals. But with that noise floor being so low, very easy to copy. So easy to pick out signals when it's this quiet. So again, the Flex DC is not adding anything to the background, which is perfect when you want to use something like this for ham radio. So I really like this aspect of the radio. Of course, you would expect that by, even if you just connected directly to a battery, right? You wouldn't be introducing any noise. But we're adding an electronic device, and without opening it up, you don't know what all is in there. But very, very quiet, very easy to use. Man, I love the property so far. Of course, I'm going to be adding things to the property that's going to be adding electromagnetic interference. But at least right now it's incredibly quiet. Now, I was going to add the preamps in there. You can see we've got a nice black background because it's extremely quiet. There's not a lot of background noise. So let's turn on the first preamp, which you would a lot of times use to try to increase the signal, but you're also increasing the noise. So here we've turned on the first preamp, and we're starting to get a little bit more coming through on the scope. You'll also see some of those crashes a little better coming from the hurricane down south a little bit. But we still have a lot of nice black area, meaning that, again, the noise floor is really low. It is emphasizing some of the signals that are out there. And then let's bring up the second preamp. So we're boosting it even more, and we still have not quite solid backgrounds, but very little ambient noise in the background that's being amplified in addition to a signal that you might be having a hard time picking out. So even with both preamps turned on, we've got a really good quiet background. And then if we go to one of the actual signals, let's find somebody communicating. There we go. Now that's with two preamps turned on. Look how quiet it is to the left and to the right. A few crashes in there from the atmospheric activity down south. And then let's turn off the preamps.
36, Whiskey Alpha 4, Baker Kilo, Lima, Tom, your call.
Very nice.
59, name here is John. I'm putting a kilowatt into a Mosley 7-element Yankee up 75.
There we go. Boy, just love seeing a really clean signal with nothing to the left or right. Not as much activity today. You know, on some days, especially on the weekends when you got a lot of POTA activations or you've got a contest going on, it's hard to find a blank space because all the little segments or all the band is basically being used. But tonight we have a great way of just going to the left or to the right, seeing a lot of that just quietness out there on the bands. Different days you'll get different results. But the Flex DC is not adding anything that I can tell to the overall background noise. Well, let's wrap it up in the next segment. The number one advantage I find with these units is the expandability. There are some really good units out there by other companies, no doubt about it. Like I said, if I could go back, if I could come forward 2+ years and not have bought these and was looking around now, I don't know that I would buy these because some of the other products are really good products. But what keeps me coming back towards the Inergy products is that expandability. You can break these down pretty easily. You can add more batteries, theoretically up to 96. You can add an MPPT supercharger for 3 strings of solar or more if you add multiples of those with your stack. You have the DC head unit and the AC head unit. There really isn't this much flexibility anywhere else out there in that lithium-ion arena. The other advantage that I really enjoy about these units is that they're easy to use and they are easy to break down. So if you need to transport these, they really don't recommend more than 2 batteries with a head unit because it gets quite heavy. These batteries that they're using, the nickel, manganese, cobalt, are dense, and even though the modules don't look that big, they are pretty heavy per battery pack, for instance. So you really don't want to stack more than 2. And then the flexibility of the different outputs. On the Flex 1500, you've got those AC plugs. You've got the 12-volt DC plugs, plus you've got the 5.5 by 2.5 millimeter outputs, the USB-A and the USB-C. On the DC, you've got those 12-volt plugs. You have those Anderson power poles. You could feed those Anderson power poles into a distribution box if you wanted to, so that you could plug in multiple DC power devices and or radios as long as you don't exceed that 30 amp limit. And that's quite a lot when you're thinking about DC based devices. And then it also has the DC output round output connectors, USB-A and 4 USB-Cs. So they're really flexible in the types and number of devices that you can plug into them. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the disadvantages. I like the handle on the top of these head units that you see here in the picture. It does make it relatively easy to carry. But when you add at least 2 batteries, they do get quite heavy, and you've got to be careful. Those latches that we looked at a little bit earlier, those little orange sliders, are okay. But with the weight of 2 batteries, you're probably putting stress on the actual metal latches that go into the unit above it, that keeps them together. And if you're not careful, you cannot potentially, you could forget to latch one side of the other or the other of a module, go to pick it up and bend one of those metal latches on the top. If it sounds like that's already happened to me, it's because it has. Yes, you can get some needle nose pliers and try to bend them back, and I've done that, and I didn't damage it to the point where it was unusable, but that's a weak spot in my opinion. I would have liked to have seen some kind of bottom base plate where you can utilize a strap to hold the stack together, at least 2 units, 2 battery modules, for instance. So I'd like to see some kind of a base plate that would really allow all of the modules that are in the stack to be held in place much more securely than just those latches. I think when Inergy was putting these together originally, they really just didn't anticipate that many customers trying to stack 4 or 5 of these together. Of course you can, but you would never want to pick them up by that small handle on the top. And it is pretty beefy, but it would be way too heavy. And you're taking a chance with that little orange latch on the side. If you miss latching one of those, you can damage that little metal latch. For the Flex DC power station, you're looking at $1,325, and that is the DC head unit plus one of the batteries, just one. Again, 1,000 watt hours nominal. If you were looking at the AC unit, the price for that is $1,450, and I didn't pay quite that much at all. Again, when these were introduced over 2+ years ago, the pricing was less because inflation hadn't really kicked in. Parts were easier, or at least theoretically easier at the time these were introduced, so they weren't as expensive. They have gone up in price. Plus, I got discounts for having to wait so long. So I'm kind of happy I bought when I did because I got them much cheaper. They did send me some free products like LEDs and the fast wall chargers, even a 12-volt skillet. But ultimately, if you were buying these today, a little bit pricey. If you compare them with other lithium-ion based solutions, you're not getting as much capacity as in some of the other solutions. What you are getting is ruggedness. All of these modules are in metal cases. Inergy has always used metal cases on the Kodiak, the Apex, and in this case, the Flex. If you start looking at some of their newer lines, the Kodiak X2 power stations that they've just introduced, they are partial metal and partial plastic, and you're seeing a lot more plastic on a lot of these lithium-ion battery solutions. But at least for the Flex, it's all metal, just like the Kodiaks, and it's good looking. The corners have been sort of, so to speak, rounded off so that they don't poke you, and are pretty nice. One other disadvantage for the Flex that I'll bring up are the feet. If you look at the bottom of the picture here, you'll see that sitting on a table, you have 2 or 4 corners, of course. They do provide little rubber pieces that can fit on the metal on the bottom of these modules. But those little rubber pieces have an uncanny ability of just falling off. And the reason they're there somewhat optionally is that you might stack these in different orders, and they won't stack if the rubber feet are on them. You actually have to take the rubber feet off. And then that means you got to keep up with where are the little rubber feet. Also, when you're not using one of the modules, there's a cap to put on the proprietary connector that connects all the modules together for communications and for charging. It's sometimes easy to lose those caps. And I wish they had some way to maybe affix the cap to some type of a string or what have you, or supply some type of a bag to go with the product to keep the feet and the little caps in, so that at least you'd have a fighting chance of not losing them. So would I purchase this again? Well, I've said a couple of times maybe through the video, I don't know. 2 years after ordering these devices, I'm glad I have them. Let's put it that way. I'm glad I have them. I'm using them with my travel trailer so that I have additional power. I've hooked up 3 strings to these to test the MPPT supercharger, and on a good sunny day it does charge these up quickly. And I'm looking to get some even higher wattage panels. I have to be careful though, the 90 volts DC is the maximum input voltage, so usually you're looking at a couple of these higher wattage panels to stay underneath that. But with the panels that I've got, the used panels that I've got, I'm getting really good charge rates into the batteries. And I've got 3 of the flex batteries, which gives me 3,000 watts that I can use for various activities if I can't run the generator, for instance. So I'm pretty happy with them. There are some disadvantages. There are some other products out there, but I'm pretty happy with these units. And with the flexibility of adding to it down the road, if I want to add some additional batteries to either of these head units, I certainly can do that, which is not what you can say for a lot of the other units. In some of the bigger units from Blue Eddy and other vendors, you can add another unit, and in some cases, up to 2 additional batteries, but they are not inexpensive. Again, prices for these batteries on all of the vendors' websites have gone up. The batteries are 1,000 watts. I wish they had a 2,000 watt version. Yes, it would make the module a little bit bigger. Even if it was twice as large, but had 2 to 3 times more capacity, I think customers would like that instead of making the modules just 1,000 watts. So that's one of the recommendations. And I'd also like to see a base plate to add to the bottom to protect the feet and to make sure that the stack doesn't have a chance of coming apart if you forget to engage one of the latches on either side. That's it for the Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association. I'm KY4BDP, and take a look at these and see if it will fit your needs. Definitely for HAMRadio, that Flex DC works a treat, and I think you would enjoy it. It won't be on the cheaper side, but it will be something that you can use for other activities beyond just HAMRadio. Camping, POTA activations, field days, or anything where you're out and about and don't have quick access to power, either AC or DC. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching, and 73.